Everybody hear me then? Matt, am I on mic? Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, Matt, for allowing me to share this time with the rest of our colleagues. And I see we have 22 participants. This is going to be fun. It's meant more to be an informal presentation and chat. And this all started because I had been thinking and chatting with Matt about how he approaches his practice business-wise and how I approach mine. And so then I run into an interesting book that I share with Matt as well. And I said, this could be an interesting conversation to talk about, where people see themselves falling in this debate of are you a generalist or are you a specialist? So we came up with this, and I have to make sure that let me see, I don't want to see the waiting room and I don't want to see you guys there. So I wanted to share some thoughts about this idea behind this chat today. And it comes from this book that I was talking about by David Epstein called Range: Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. And there I've revealed my bias and where I see myself falling. So he says, the more constrained and repetitive the challenge, the more likely it will be automated, while great rewards will accrue to those who can take conceptual knowledge from one problem or domain and apply it in an entirely new one. And then he further says, let me make, and so I think I missed, wait a minute, I need to go back. Oh, he says, as complexity increases, as technology spins the world into vaster webs of interconnected systems in which each individual only sees a small part, we need people who embrace diverse perspectives, people with range. And so this is kind of to set the stage for our conversation today. And, I just wanted to go back to saying sorry, guys, I'm jumping all over the place. Let me make sure that I'm, okay. Now I'm having a hard time there. I'm just going to use the arrow. So where I'm coming from, I've always been a question asker. I've always asked, wanted to know why, what, I think maybe this comes from the fact that my father was a neurologist and he was always talking about the brain and how it functioned. And to me, it was just fascinating. And I always wanted to know more. I always interviewed people from all, the plumbers, the electricians, the painters, the maids, anybody who came around me. I was always asking, because I'm curious about all kinds of things. And I think that's kind of where my generalist thinking comes from. And as I grew older, I think that, every time I move this, I found myself feeling like a butterfly. Most adult butterflies preferred sipping nectar from any flower that they can access. And so that's kind of how I see myself a little bit. But I wanted to stop here because we had decided that Matt and Robert were going to talk about their stance. I positioned myself as a generalist. Matt, were you going to go first?
I'm happy to go first.
Okay, so Matt sees himself more as a specialist. So he's going to be talking about where he comes from and sharing his screen now. Let me stop sharing so that he can share where he comes from and what he sees as the advantages and disadvantages. Robert will go next and I will come back last to talk about my experience as a generalist.
Okay, so last week I gave this little, I was talking about the power of passion or love as my Valentine's Day session. So I talked about these focuses, and I just want to, if anybody was there before, you'll understand what I was talking about, was with our passion, we have persistence. With a little bit of persistence and continuing to focus, we have luck. With luck comes opportunity and success. And then there's this loop, and we spent a lot of time talking about this. But if you followed me, and I know there's a bunch of people on today who just heard my presentation last night about niche, Well, I talk about this idea of niche where you've got Jim Collins' 6 ideas, but the main focus is on the hedgehog concept, which is this idea that the hedgehog is a focused individual. And this is where I think Marcela has drawn the conclusion that I'm not a generalist, but I'm focused. I'm a specific person, which is true with regard to my consulting practice, but I think that it's not true when it comes to thinking about how I operate my business, which has to be a generalist practice within a specialist focus. So I thought this was interesting because I did read the book, and I found myself agreeing with a lot of what he said. And actually, I found that from my perspective, David Epstein is talking about making sure you have a broad range of skills. But if you can apply a broad range of skills in a specific market, so when your business is concerned, your business and its niche is a hedgehog idea, but you have a generalist perspective, that's where I think you can find a lot of success. So I always go back to this hedgehog concept of the 3 overlapping circles of what are you passionate about, what are you really good at, and what drives your economic engine. So an example, I am passionate about education. I'm really good at data analysis, and there's a lot of opportunity in STEM education, anywhere from preschool all the way through postdoctorate work. And I have projects from kindergarten. I don't have any preschool right now, but from kindergarten all the way up through programs focused on associate professors. And so because I've been able to focus on the overlap of the 3 circles, I've been able to create some neat opportunities. And then to continue that, we talk about this flywheel concept is once you've identified your niche and you focus your attention after those 3 circles, you find the circle, I call it the Ferris wheel, to start spinning. And as you continue to do that, it spins more and it spins more and it spins faster and faster. And this is all conceptual, and I think it's really kind of cool idea, but I actually, just this morning, I built out this next slide to give you the very specific, my story. I can't fit everything onto this slide, but I thought I'd tell you what I mean when I say this so that you can understand by focusing my attention. And I have a generalist skills. I mean, I'm certainly not just a qualitative guy or a quantitative guy. I'm not specific, but I do find there's room where I have to be specific. And for me, it's region and it's education for the most part, but it's been able to create some new opportunities. So in the beginning, there was Blackburn. Blackburn had a math and science partnership grant, and I was the director of institutional research there. They did have evaluators, but they really didn't know anything. They literally would take surveys and they would tabulate it on paper like this, and they'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2. That's how they would calculate things, all on paper. When I showed up and I went, oh my Lord, you guys don't even know how to put things into Excel yet. So we started with Blackburn. They loved what I did, and they took me to a conference in Chicago where I met the people from Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville and some people from the St. Clair Regional Office of Education. And they said, hey, you are amazing. We didn't know evaluators existed, like we were, little leprechauns or something hiding and nobody can find, can't find us. And they said, we have an evaluator in our midst. We want you. So I helped them write 2 grants, which were subsequently funded. Because I worked with St. Clair on that one, I got to know the people there, and they said, oh, we'd love for you to help us out with this proposal that we're putting into the Department of Education for a stay-in-school grant, which was subsequently funded. At this point, I said, holy cow, I don't know how to continue working as a director of institutional research and doing this, so I went solo. Shortly after that, we secured a National Science Foundation Noyce grant with SIU based upon the relationship I had at that university. And then we secured 3 more math and science partnership grants for different regional offices and another one for SIU Edwardsville. There's actually a 4th one here that I didn't include. I'm not going to be able to include everything. That SIU Noyce grant gave me opportunity there to do another one because the next year they submitted for a 2nd Noyce grant. Because of my relationship at the St. Clair Regional Office of Education, I developed a relationship with Ms. Scuda, And through the Math and Science Partnership grants, I met somebody at the University of Northern Iowa. And this is all just staying focused on Southern Illinois STEM education, right? I reached out to Muscuda and we wrote a DODEA grant for them, was worth $1.5 million, and it was worth $15,000 a year for me, which, you know, I think is pretty significant. That led to actually more than this, but here's a list of 5 more projects by just staying focused within these areas. We subsequently got a STEM plus C NSF grant at SIU Edwardsville, and then another advanced grant at SIU Edwardsville, and I'm the program evaluator for all of that work. My relationship with the Regional Office of Education 45 led to a relationship at the Illinois Biotechnology Industry Organization, and all of this combined, I collaborated all of these ideas in, I think, a very generalist way, a very collaborative generalist way, and connected all these people together towards my big grant that was funded last summer, worth $3 million, and that's the STEM Camp grant. So this is my little illustration of how staying focused within a niche can lead from one project worth, you know, $5,000 a year, which is, you know, I didn't know what I was doing, anything to help put windows into my house. I just needed to replace windows, to a business now with 6 employees generating $1.2 million a year. That's kind of my little story of staying focused in my niche. And honestly, there's probably twice as many projects in here, and they're all related to these things. But this is kind of the core, this is the crux, and this is how you think about it. But as much as this is specialized and focused on the niche of Southern Illinois STEM education, I have to be flexible in general in my understanding for all of these things. In fact, I've talked about networking karma. It's the networking karma that I do by showing up and collaborating and connecting with these people and doing a great job of program evaluation, that I was able to connect them, and they trust me to say, hey, we should connect a couple things, particularly this iBio Stellar Girls, which became a camp, and this Muscuda, our Muscuda clients, they're the ones who contributed to the big grant that became STEM Camp. Anyway, so that's my story. And I will stop there and let Marcela pass it on to, I think Robert's next.
Yes, Robert is next. And thank you for the wonderful presentation about how you know, you think and how you build this network that has led to a very successful practice. And I think it's funny because my story couldn't be any more different than yours. So I think this is going to be great. Robert, it's your turn.
Great. I'm assuming folks can see my screen. A couple nods. Yes, good. Thank you. My name is Robert Hoke. I'm an independent consultant based in Indianapolis. I've been doing this since December of '97, and I'll sort of share some details as we move forward. Contrary to Matt, my desire has been always to be as independent as possible, which means I have not ever attempted, except for one occasion, to have employees or expand the business. My thought process has always been, I'm going to be the sole practitioner out here, responsible for me with the flexibility I need to build the way I want to build, and not have to worry about somebody else's needs. And that's different from a lot of folks. Prior to becoming a consultant, I've always been a generalist. I went to a liberal arts college, and have a degree in political science, sociology, and economics, because I couldn't even focus on one area even back then. From there, I worked for city planning for a couple of years, and then ended up at United Way, first as an allocations associate, which is basically a program officer. So got to learn a lot about a whole wide variety of agencies and program areas: mental health, boys and girls clubs, childcare. It was a whole variety of things in my portfolio. But that was also the year that United Way of America at that time introduced a brand new concept called program logic modeling. So I came in the first year of program logic modeling and helping folks learn about outcomes and how to do that type of work. So that sort of started my work in evaluation. From there, I had another job at United Way where I was in the research department in community planning, and this was early in the 90s. And back then, when we got the census, it wasn't online. I think I had one of the only 5 computers in the entire place. And I would get CDs and I would help agencies access census data and other data. So I became the data person, which also then, as technology got better, we started to put together a new program called SAVVY, which is the Social Assets and Vulnerability Indicators Project, which took community data and started putting into a GIS. Very rudimentary way back when. Now it's a multi-million-dollar project at the university. So when I left United Way to become a private consultant at the age of 34, and I'm not sure if I was consulting or freelancing. And I'm going to show you a little bit sort of my history in a different way than Matt showed. I'm not sure what I thought I was doing, other than I got this job offer to work with a corporation who did proposals for states who were privatizing their child support payment systems. So it was these 300-page proposals, and they were looking for somebody, and I suggested they do it as a contract, because it was one of those things where one week you'd be working 60 hours or 70 hours or 80 hours, and next week you'd be working 10. So they liked that idea. So I started a long process of the past 23 years of doing a whole bunch of different stuff. And I sort of put into buckets. Strategic and program planning was one of my strong suits from the beginning. I've also have done the evaluation work picked up, and you can see it's a wide variety. My expertise from leaving United Way was I knew Indiana, I knew Central Indiana, I knew the nonprofit community, I knew community data in particular, and I knew the funder community, because most of those funders who were funding other projects also funded my project. And they also turned to me even back then for data help. So that was sort of how I started building my business. And it's just sort of a wide variety, everything from human services. I then branched out into a lot of workforce development, education picked up, and a whole bunch of other stuff. This is looking at my history. I just sort of threw this together, looking at what I've been doing over the years and how my mix of projects have varied. The blue being evaluation work, the red being more planning and program planning, and the yellow being the other stuff. A lot of it's data oriented, but a lot of it was otherwise folks calling me simply because they knew me and they needed somebody who they could get on board immediately and trusted, even though it was something completely different. Looking at a little bit more detail from what I've been looking past history, the evaluation work has become much more steady in the last 10 years, 15 years or so. What I started off doing was a lot of other stuff, and the evaluation just kept picking up and picking up, especially for those of you who know Indiana, the Lilly Endowment is the second or third largest private foundation in the country, and they have a lot of emphasis on Central Indiana and Indiana, and they basically, where they move, the city moves with them. And so a lot of the work I've been doing is based on understanding what the Lilly Endowment wants and how to work inside their paradigm. But it also meant I was doing a lot of external work in terms of needs assessments, and also doing work in the disaster recovery fund management information. I don't know if you can see my little cursor moving. back here in 2008, 2009 was after a tremendous flood in 2008 that affected 2/3 of the state. The Lilly Endowment put out $10 million, no, I'm sorry, $40 million in funds for local organizations to access. And the way they access it was through the State United Way. That state organization called me and said, do you have time to work on this? And I said, when do you need me? They said, can you be here in 20 minutes? And that became my life for the next 2 years. Mainly because they knew I understood Lilly, they knew I understood the community, and could explain how to do a grant process. It was an evaluation, it wasn't anything I touched before, but as a generalist, I could walk into that situation. Similarly, the work over the course of the years, especially in evaluation, has basically been a repeat from my early United Way days. It's teaching folks how to do program logic modeling, how to think evaluatively on various subjects. It started off in human services, it went to education, libraries are quickly picking up. It just seems to be a trend that various sectors seem to pick up this idea, and they need some evaluative coaching or they need some evaluation work. I kind of see myself as being sort of like, I hate sports metaphors because I'm so bad at them, but I kind of see it as being in the minor leagues. I take what I learned from AEA and then I try to figure out how to make it work for local folks, and also understanding how local funders think. A case study, and this is intentionally to be green. And how am I doing on time?
Probably need to be wrapping it up.
Okay, then I'll talk. What's been helpful to be a generalist is, for example, is back in the mid 2000s, I was approached by the Domestic Violence Council to do some work, and I have not been involved with domestic violence programming before, but they mainly wanted me because they wanted somebody local, and they wanted somebody who understood the funders and who could help them translate their action plan into something that would be sellable to local funders, and have somebody in the room who could say, you know, you're talking jargon here. Let's break this out and talk a little bit more. From there, I went to a National Justice Department's grant to the Julian Center, which was a domestic violence program, who they also looking for a local funder for human trafficking. But the problem I had was I didn't understand completely the national scope of things or the history, and that really became a problem when, for example, I was used to producing reports that the local funders wanted that said, give it to me in 2 pages. The Department of Justice wanted to hear a thud. They wanted a 100-page report. And they also had some very specific political agendas that I didn't understand completely. So that's where it did not fit properly. As a wrap up, Marcela, I am going to wrap up. The generalist versus specialist, I think, also is part of the larger debate about what the role of evaluator is. And the way I'm seeing things is, when I started back in my first AEA event was in 2001. It was all about methods and techniques and how, and whether you're qualitative or quantitative and how you do it right. And I think over the years has moved much more to what we provide is evaluative thinking, very much more of a generalist approach. The primary delivery back then was reports, and very specific reports. And so if you know how to do a 21st century after school program report, that's all you did. And that's how you learned how to do things. And now it's much more of or there's a trend toward what we're trying to produce is organizational thinking, and not necessarily just a thud report at the end of the program. And that also goes into the Scriven versus patent debate, which we can talk about later if so folks so choose. Marcela, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thank you, Robert. Again, everybody loves your charts. So I think they want to invite you back to share that with us at another time. And I love your life experience as well, how you share that with us. So let me take it from where I was. Am I sharing? Am I sharing the screen now?
No.
No? Okay, let me go back to, where was I? Okay, here. Hold on, guys. I don't do this often. So, okay, and my, here it is. Can you see it now? No? Hello?
Nope, not yet.
Not yet. What is
So,
going on?
Did you hit the share screen, the little green
Yeah,
button?
share
Okay.
screen. Let me make
While
sure
she's doing that, I'll tell everybody that everybody loves Robert, clearly. He is going to be giving a presentation for us. He'll be the main and only host for or special host for our March 4th session on how to game recessions and recoveries. All right, and we can see you now.
All right. Okay. So let me pick up where everybody else left off and talk a little bit about me. And as you can see, I am coming from a very different world. This is my LinkedIn description of my work and my experience over the past 25 years of experience in evaluation with a holistic approach to measuring results across content silos in areas including human services, maternal and child health, education, family economic stability, and broad community-based initiatives, I should say, among others. National experience in low-income urban and rural settings, and international experience in Latin America, India, and sub-Saharan African work. So as you can see, I can't land on just one topic, not even one place. I'm all over the place. But I wanted to share with you an example of how I see this generalist, how I think, and why I think it's been good for me in in my personal practice. Maybe not the best approach financially, because as someone was saying, you know, how do you come across as an expert generalist when people are still looking for someone with very specialized, content knowledge? But I think what we're selling is the set of skills, I think what Matt was talking about. So I'm going to use an example from an evaluation that I was a part of for the Kellogg Foundation. It was an evaluation of their entire portfolio in Haiti. And I was subcontracted to do the maternal and child health piece and the family economic stability piece, I guess, because I had experience in both. I also had experience in education, but that was not assigned to me. And those were seen as three legs of a stool of their portfolio. Each one was managed by a different project manager, and they were seen as very much silos. They didn't interconnect, they didn't cross. Where in my mind, they did. And that's the story that I'm gonna tell you. So as part of the family economic stability, I was helping their grantees figuring out how we were going to capture the impact in terms of increase in income when these were very, very poor farmers, in this case, female farmers. So this is an example of an organization that was working with female entrepreneurs, very poor, and they started giving them chickens, and they helped them build this chicken coop. You can see here doing a site visit. She's the entrepreneur. The man with the hat is the program person who's visiting her every day. And the organization has given her the chickens, the coops, the cages, and she can either sell chickens for meat or she can sell the eggs. So we needed to figure out, well, how are we going to show that she's gained income, that she's doing better? And it was very challenging because in Haiti, when you're talking about extreme poverty, we're talking about going from $1 a day to $2 a day. That's your earnings, okay? So I told the foundation, look, this is not about income. We won't be able to measure income. But I had evaluation experience in microfinance through the work that I did in India. And through that work in microfinance, I knew of two tools that we had used and that are commonly used to measure changes in wealth or progress out of poverty when you're dealing with a very, very poor population. One was the PPI, or the Poverty Probability Index. It is a tool that is used to measure household levels of poverty. And then you compare the score against the national poverty line, and you see whether this family is climbing out of poverty. It's not going to tell you whether they're moving into the middle class, but going from $1 a day to $2 a day is doubling your income. And if you go above that, $4 a day, then you're really doing a lot better. So that's the kind of measurement we're talking about. The House or Hunger Scale were four questions that are used as a proxy for poverty, and it's about food insecurity. So I introduced the tool, we trained the enumerators, they collected the data, I helped them with the analysis, and we came up with an idea, with an assessment, a baseline of where these farmers were. The nonprofits were going to continue taking these two measures and seeing if their families were in fact progressing and moving, hopefully, out of poverty ranges. But that's not the end of that story. Remember the eggs there? Well, the eggs were bought by the nonprofit using the grant from the Kellogg Foundation, and they were then donated to local schools. The local schools provided a school feeding program using the eggs that my friend Solange, the entrepreneur, had produced. So we left Solange with some income, and now the kids are getting eggs for breakfast. So we went from family economic stability to nutrition and health. And I'm saying, well, guys, we cannot just stop there. You're having more of an impact because now the school is benefiting from the eggs. So how are we going to capture that? Well, then I drew from my experience evaluating childhood obesity prevention for Robert Wood Johnson in the US. This was back several years ago when Robert Wood Johnson said this was going to be one of their priorities. And then a lot of the grantees were using the body mass index as a measure of obesity. In this case, I said, well, we can also measure it as a measure of children who are gaining weight, because now, believe it or not, that egg would have been the only source of protein for many of these children who were seriously undernourished. So what we did is I convinced the nonprofit, another nonprofit that was working with the same farmers and the same schools, to measure the BMI of the children that were getting the school feeding, participating in the school feeding program. They collaborated with another organization that I was working in on the maternal and child health, and they used their nurses to go to the schools, measure the BMI, which has to be done and well documented, and then provided the data for almost 3,000 children in schools, baseline data of where these children were. And not only that, I didn't stop there. I said, hey, guys, we can do a comparison group design, because now we have the schools that are getting the feeding program and getting the eggs and some other nutritional snacks during the day, to schools that are waiting or not getting anything. And then we can definitely show how this combination of the, combining the entrepreneurial aspect of, allowing someone to raise the chickens, to lay the eggs, buying the eggs, providing them to the school, feeding them to the kids, was having an effect that wasn't just limited to economics or nutrition. And it doesn't stop there, because guess what? These children are coming to school to get an education. And as many of you who work in education know, attendance and school performance are very much related to access to school breakfast programs. In this article that I found in 2019, access to school breakfast program is associated with higher attendance and test scores among elementary school students. This is a study here in the US, but we knew from anecdotal accounts in Haiti that families were in fact making sure that their kids came to school every day, because that was one egg they weren't going to miss. And so we started saying, all right, let's track attendance for these kids and see if we can see that the breakfast program is also an enticement for families to bring their children to school and therefore improve their educational chances. So then from education to health to income, I was connecting the dots because I had worked in all of them and I know that all of these are connected. I was drawing from the experience in each of these fields to come up with tools that, you know, the income people wouldn't have thought of using the PPI or the household hunger scale to measure the whole impact. What I saw is, again, in the way of looking at things holistically, in looking at things not as silos, but as things that are interconnected, and therefore we need to think of the impact of these interventions as something that needs to be measured as a whole. And I think that what I wanted to do was to leave, you know, the foundation with the idea that these are not, in fact, silos. These are not separate pieces of your portfolio. They all overlap and they should be linked together. That, and I thought the example of the farmer, the nutritional breakfast program, and the attendance was a great way of showing how all of those pieces come together for greater impact, that foundation should be also talking about. And yet, and then I said, well, what kind of evaluation was that? Was that an evaluation of a nutritional intervention? Was that an evaluation of an economic intervention? Or was that an evaluation of an education intervention? Without knowing it, it was all three. And I think that once we start looking at you know, our work as an interconnected work, these things start blooming. I think the problem that I face as a consultant is that funders think in silos and they fund in silos. So creating this connectivity and saying, you know, how do we look at these things in a different way so that we start you know, connecting the dots early on at the strategy design, at the portfolio design stage, rather than waiting at the end for me to tell them that these things are in fact connected. So that's kind of my example. And I love the way it's so different from what Robert and Matt shared with their own experience of how, you know, they approach their business and their work. And in fact, I am committed to changing funders' minds. I think we need to break that silo mentality and help them see the connections because they can be much more effective, particularly in these situations where we're dealing with, you know, working at the community level as we were in Haiti. This was all happening within that same small rural community. So that's why these three projects overlap. I think that it is important to change that perspective, and maybe at that time they'll be looking for people who can help them connect the dots. So with that, I want to open it up for reactions, conversations, discussions. I know that some people have already said, you know, I'm a hybrid, or maybe I'm this or that. So Matt, can you help us have a conversation?
Sure, and I'll stop recording right there.